Hello, y'all, and welcome back to the What the Hype Watercooler. This week, we are reviewing and reacting to Deadpool and Wolverine, the hotly anticipated only Marvel movie of 2024. And here to help me, I have Mark and Eric. Y'all, thank you so much for joining me today. We've all seen Deadpool and Wolverine in the last couple of days, and we just kind of put together a doc yesterday and just started like idea dumping about all the things that we want to talk about. But before we get into it, I just want to make sure that y'all are following us here on YouTube, What the Hype Podcast, as well as following What the Hype Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want links to all of our various socials, you can go to whatthehypepodcast.com. But without further ado, I'd love for us to get into this conversation by just giving some initial reactions to the movie. Who wants to kick us off?
Mark, you go ahead.
So
Mark is our resident Marvel encyclopedia, by the way.
I if you missed it way back when, I did a PowerPoint of every Marvel movie you had to watch before Infinity Wars, and man, that sounds like that feels like a lifetime ago. So, but yeah, I think it was great. They did a really good job. It was truly like a fan, like it was a love letter to fans. And like it didn't leave people who weren't as into the Marvel, mythos out. There was still plenty of stuff that made it an enjoyable movie if you didn't know anything. And Ryan Reynolds, had his hands all over this movie, and he's really good at that. Like he has a very good sense of pop culture, very good sense of like, what to make jokes of, what will kind of like resonate with people. Because I mean, he's pretty funny. Like he's just a funny guy, so he's pretty good at like picking those things to kind of riff on. And yeah, like it was great for like any Fox fans. If you're a fan of all the old Fox movies, it was a perfect swan song. It was kind of like what they did with Logan, but with the entire Fox like franchise, really. So yeah, it was great. I was genuinely smiling like the whole time. Like this is one of those movies that it was just a fun ride,
Same.
Yeah, I'll completely agree with that. I think having seen, all of the Fox X-Men movies in particular, such a fan of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Even the ones that were less well received, I still went and saw religiously. And, it predates the MCU in many ways. So it was a joy to see that exact phrase love letter to Fox, and I had seen the original Daredevil with Elektra in it, and I had seen the original Punisher, which maybe not have been physically represented but had Rebecca Romijn in a different role. I really knew a lot about those Fox films and did not expect to see many characters and or those same iterations of those characters played by some of the same actors get back. Deadpool over the last 3 films has had such a sort of ensemble feel to it, especially the second one, was about all this family that Wade had found. And it's very interesting to see them, that family take a back seat in this because he's, doesn't take any of them with him on his multiversal adventure. But at the same time, that ensemble from the previous films is able to be his sort of emotional anchor. And that's what he's trying to get back to. And so it's really interesting. With some people might be like, well, they totally like screwed those guys, or they gave them like a back seat in this film because there was so much else going on. I'm like, yeah, but they still got to be like the reason why he's doing this. And so they got to have their cake and eat it too, I think, in many, many, many ways.
Yeah, I mean, he saved them. He did the only thing he could.
Yeah, I mean, they saved everything technically.
Yeah.
Like
not just his versions of them, but all of them.
Yeah, I mean, he technically is Marvel Jesus. Like he saved the entire multiverse.
The prophecy is true.
Yeah, he has fulfilled the prophecy, but
that he himself wrote like 2 hours before.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, like because if he didn't stop Nova, not Nova, there's a different Marvel character named Nova, but Cassandra Nova.
Right.
If he didn't stop her, all of the universes would have been gone except for the Void. So like he did save the MCU, right? So he did it, just not the way we were thinking he was going to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we Talk about some of the pros and cons of the movie before we really start getting into some of the meta commentary and which characters crop back up and what surprised us about the movie.
Before we do that, Laura,
Yeah.
I would like to ask, like, what's your general thoughts, you guys, on what films you needed to see before going into
Oh,
this?
great
Because, like, to
question.
be honest, like Hugh Jackman is back as Wolverine. How much, I know I have a read on sort of how many of those films you had to see of the Fox, but as far as MCU too, I know I'm like 5 or 6 movies behind. Still seen 26 movies, but like I'm still like, was there anything necessary? What would be your rule of thumb here?
Mark, I defer to you.
I would say one of the big ones is Loki. There, TVA was all over it, so obviously anything like Loki season 1, season 2. I would say the previous Deadpool movies, and honestly, in terms of the Fox movies, it's kind of just a free for all because people from almost every Fox movie show up.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the important ones are the Deadpool movies, of course, and then X-Men Origins Wolverine, or the one where it was like X-Men or Wolverine's origin
The
story.
worst reviewed
Yep,
one of them
yep,
all.
exactly.
Next
And
to
like,
Dark Phoenix. I haven't
oh,
compared the two's reviews,
oh,
but
oh.
I'm still in pain. Those
There's
wounds
a
haven't
reason they
healed
didn't
yet.
touch that movie in this one.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like that X-Men Origins is Ryan Reynolds playing Deadpool for the first time because Wade was in that movie. Ryan
yeah.
Reynolds was very disappointed that that was the way they, you know, showed that character because that really wasn't Deadpool. He was the most Deadpool in the beginning of that movie when he was just like he had the dual swords and he was just slicing people and he cut that bullet in half. That was a big thing for that movie. But I'd say that one, Blade's a big one because that was also Ryan Reynolds' first Marvel movie. That's the first one he was ever in Blade 3 as Hannibal. And yeah, and
Oh.
he got jacked for that movie. Like that he was kind of the first person to really like change for a role like that because he was so stoked because like he's a comic nerd, like he loves comics. So like that's why when he saw Deadpool, like his agent came to say, "Hey, you want to play Wade Wilson in the new Wolverine movie?" He was like, "Hell yeah, I do." And then after the movie, he was like, "I don't know what that was. That wasn't Deadpool." And then he kind of started the movement to get an actual standalone Deadpool movie. So that was mostly him. Like he did that, and it just kind of proves like how much he is invested in the character and how much he wants to see the character done well.
Well,
But
and proof positive because it
mhm,
was the first R-rated, sort of superhero film ever, and made $1 billion at the box
yeah,
office. Was a huge
Mm-hmm.
hit. Was able to push boundaries that no one knew needed pushing.
hmm
So that's really exciting. I would say, just to jump in here, Logan is probably essential,
yes,
but Logan
Yeah.
itself comes with its own
hmm
reading work. Like if you go into Logan, you're going to miss a lot of what Hugh Jackman is doing in that
hmm
movie if you haven't seen at least like X-Men and X2.
yeah.
I want to say,
I'd say the first three just to be safe because the third one is where they go into the Days of Future Past storyline, which explains the separate timeline you get where like Jean's alive, Scott's alive because they're icing people left and right in X-Men 2. Like people are dying, they're dropping like flies. So like it kind of like you kind of need to see X-Men 3 to see how they reset things cuz Logan follows that arc. Like Logan takes place after they reset everything in 3 and
you're talking about The Last Stand?
yes.
Okay.
No, 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 no. Wait.
Because that's
Days of
so,
whatever Days of Future Past is.
yeah.
Is that
Oh,
X3? No,
God.
that's X. Is
It's
that
before Dark. It's so they did First Class first, I want to say.
is Days of Future Past cuz there's Apocalypse too, right?
Uh,
Apocalypse was X
well, Apocalypse I think was after. No, Dark Phoenix was after. Apocalypse was first or before. So
okay.
they did the whole First Class reboots, and then
Mhm.
Days of Future Past brought the old crew
With the
and
new
the First
crew.
Class crew back. So it's like 5 or 6 at this point.
Yeah, there.
This turns out to be a bigger reading list than I thought
Mm-hmm.
for this
Mm-hmm.
film, but I think what it is that Hugh Jackman is doing such an amazing thing with this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Not just returning to the character that he made his own, against a lot of like people were predisposed not to enjoy that. But, you know, he's taken that mantle up after already discarding it and saying goodbye to it, doing something new with it, like just to fully appreciate everything Hugh Jackman is doing in this movie. That's why I think it comes with more of that baggage of seeing a lot of the X films. Otherwise, you know, if you're strictly an MCU person who has heard that these mutants are coming to the MCU and you're really not sure what's going on, like, you wouldn't otherwise, I think, need to do a lot of reading, because anything that happens stands on its own. You know.
Yeah.
I'd say,
And
I'd say, oh, go ahead.
I'll jump in here and say, I know it can be really overwhelming to hear, oh my gosh, I have to watch all these movies to like fully appreciate this one film. Honestly, I think if you only have a smattering of, you know, viewings across the MCU and X-Men, I think you'll be fine. There may be some references and some like deeper Easter eggs that have more meaning to people who were really invested in those franchises. So you might miss out on some of those, but I think the movie is still plenty enjoyable. I'll also say that there are so many great deep dives and full-on recaps of the MCU to date, as well as all of the X-Men movies. So if you don't have time to sit down and watch all that stuff, but you still want to feel like you're up to speed, go on YouTube and you can look up a variety of different movie recaps that give you the most important takeaways from all the movies. So you can walk into this one feeling confident, like, okay, yeah, I got it. I understand the high points of this franchise, so I can actually go in and enjoy this movie.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that 100%. And like, I think one thing to kind of look at with this movie too is there are so many different levels of legacy with this movie, you know. Kind of like, you know, if you're just a MCU person, you just want to see this new movie and kind of see where it fits, that's fine. You know, you really, for that, you just need Loki. Really, like, you don't really need anything else. You Most people have seen Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in some capacity at this point, so you kind of know what the vibe is, you know. If you like are a Fox fan, you want to get all the references, then yeah, watch some of the old Fox movies. Watch X-Men, you know, Days of Future Past, X1 and 2. Watch even 3, because there are people from 3 that show up. Watch The Punisher. Watch Elektra, Daredevil. Um, there's plenty. There's plenty you can Blade, of course. Like, there's plenty you can watch and appreciate, and those references will show themselves. And if you want to either an even further level, since it's Deadpool, most of the movie is meta commentary. So a lot of it is like, what are the relationships with these actors, right? Like, it's not so much the character itself, but like seeing Wesley Snipes as Blade, and then him being like, there's only ever one Blade, and Deadpool just looks at the camera, it's like, yeah, because they're making a new Blade movie. So like, that, there's so much of that in this
Not
movie.
with Wesley Snipes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So like, there's so much of that. Like, they even talk about how like him and Ryan Reynolds didn't have the best relationship when they're making that movie. And, you know, it's been exaggerated over time. Like, I don't think they hated each other. There was some friction there. So when Blade is like, I don't like you, and Deadpool's like, yeah, you never did, that was Ryan Reynolds talking to Wesley Snipes, right? Like, so it's just stuff like that that's so, there's so many layers and levels to the references. Like, it's not like, you know, watching Infinity War or Endgame or like No Way Home, where it's like, this character is here and they're operating as this character in this universe. It's the character and the actor are there, and there's a bunch of commentary for both, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that fulfills sort of the promise of Deadpool in this fourth wall breaking. You know, nothing is off limits. One of the things I'm glad I did prior to Deadpool and Wolverine is just rewatching the Deadpool films. And I don't even think I had ever seen Deadpool 2. I wanted to at the time, got busy, you know, ended up not seeing it. But really refamiliarizing myself with, there are a few jokes like the superhero landing that make it to all 3 Deadpool films, as it turns out, but not a lot does, except the style is the same, and the characters and all that. But yeah, knowing that they went full on balls to the wall, sort of actors, you know, characters showing up as their actors too, like you're saying, is very impressive. And they took that to another extreme with Chris Evans. So
yeah, for
absolutely.
sure.
Like all of the cameos, like, and that's the thing, like usually cameos in movies, like usually I would never say this movie is great because of the cameos. That's usually not
Right.
something you would say, but they were so expertly done. Like they were almost
Mhm.
surgically inserted into the movie at specific times with specific people, and they have so much weight. Like Henry Cavill, when he showed up, it's like people
Yeah.
have been begging for him to be the new Wolverine ever since Logan. They're like, oh, I guess Henry Cavill's gonna be the new Wolverine because he's perfect. And honestly, if that was like a temperature test they were doing, he passed with flying colors because he nailed it. Like
Yeah.
when he turned around and he was wearing that motorcycle, I was like, I'm in. Like, you know.
Well, where's the Doug Ray Scott version of Wolverine, who's almost cast instead, and Hugh Jackman, and ended up making Mission Impossible 2 instead. Like, but there are that many nods too of characters who didn't, or actors who didn't get the role or almost got it. Like Channing Tatum shows up in this film.
Yeah, as Gambit.
Poor Channing Tatum. They made fun of him so much. Deadpool was just giving him the hardest time.
I'm so ready. That accent. I mean, it was probably perfect Creole. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
it's just
I have
coming
no
out of
idea.
It's just coming out of Channing Tatum's mouth. You're like, something is weird. But he did a great job. He did a great job. Like,
yeah, no, he did.
There was even a scene that like a lot of people didn't realize, like the Russian from Punisher. There's like a famous scene in the Punisher, the first Punisher movie, where Punisher stabs this Russian big, because he looks like Where's Waldo on roids, and he like stabs him, and the guy just looks down at the knife in his chest and just punches Frank Castle. And the funny thing about that scene is the person playing Frank Castle actually, like, he accidentally stabbed him, like that. He really stabbed him by accident. So when Gambit is fighting him and Gambit stabs him with his like bow staff, and he's like on the ground like looking at himself, and then he blows up, like that was kind of a nod to that scene in Punisher. So like it is deep. Like there are so many references in that movie that are so multi-tiered. Like, yeah, you saw the Punisher, and yeah, you saw that character being the assassin coming to kill Frank Castle, but if you didn't know the stuff about the whole, like the stab being a real stab, that wouldn't have as much weight, but you didn't miss anything, right? Like it's not like you were like, what's that guy?
I was reading an article that was like, why didn't Jon Favreau reprise his role as Foggy Nelson from Daredevil? And I'm like, that was so long ago. I've completely forgotten. And Happy Hogan is the more recognizable MCU character because he's been in like almost all of those. But yeah, just the movie has so many levels. It's so deep.
Something that I will say kind of surprised me was the movie kind of lacking like major connectivity and consequences for the MCU. Felt like it was a lot more connected to the Fox movies, which makes sense to Mark's point about this being the movie to kind of give the Fox X-Men universe its swan song moment. I mean, we literally see the 20th Century Fox logo half buried in sand in the void. So they're making it very clear that this is the end of an era. But even though this takes place in the MCU, there aren't ultimately really any impacts on the MCU apart from the fact that he stops Cassandra Nova from destroying it.
I love when they're saying that Daredevil died, and Deadpool's like, "Oh my God, Daredevil, I'm so sorry," and Elektra's like, "It's fine."
Yeah, right. Well, and that's just real world commentary there, because Jennifer Garner and Ben Affleck, that was.
I don't know what I wasn't paying attention to the celebrity gossip. I'm like, it went a little over my head, but ooh, God, ooh.
What about? I mean, I think it's fine for us to hop around here, but like, Eric, what about early on in the film where Deadpool says there are 206 bones in the human body, 207 if I'm watching Gossip Girl, because Blake Lively was the star of Gossip Girl.
All right.
So lots of
Blake
little
Lively,
things like
who
that.
shows up, I found out, as the female Deadpool.
Yep.
As Lady Deadpool.
Yep, she's Lady Deadpool. Yeah.
Lady Deadpool.
I love that they didn't take her mask off. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
That was a good touch, because I feel like if they took her mask off as Blake Lively, people are like, okay, all right. But I love that it was just like, you don't need to see who's under the mask. Like with pretty much all those Deadpools, there was like an Iron Man Deadpool and a Deadpool the Kid, the the cowboy one, then Kid Pool, and then Baby Pool, and all that stuff. So that was the
No, they even
Deadpool
had
pool.
head pool.
They had Headpool, yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly thought Headpool was going to be the severed head from X-Men Origins. I thought they were going to use that.
That would be wild.
Yeah, and just have him be shooting laser eyes, because that's what he like. That would be cool. But I like that they went with the traditional Headpool that just has a propeller hat and he's just hovering around.
Oh
that was great.
It gets crazy. And but this film still had something that many Marvel films go without, which is a satisfying villain too, in Cassandra Nova. Talk about somebody that, like, who's a character that is untapped but is fairly well known in the comics, or like Charles Xavier had a twin. Like, I knew he had a sibling, he had a twin, and absolutely killed it. I mean, Cassandra Nova is such a creepy, clever character that fits right in with this storyline. I think that, I don't know, I was in love.
And she fits the theme perfectly, because the whole point of the movie is discarded people, like discarded worlds, discarded people. And like, honestly, the fact that not many people know about her, and even in the comics, she was just kind of ejected from Charles's story as an infant, and she grew up in the background and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, like that fits. Like, it fits for her to be this way. I will say, I wish Marvel would get out of the habit of killing off their villains. Like, stop killing off your villains. Like, keep them around. Like, there are so many villains that work so well in the MCU. Like for example, you were mentioning villains that are kind of like untapped, and they make them way better, which Marvel is good at that. Like, when they pick a villain, especially for the Spider-Man movies, they are way cooler than they've ever been in the comics. Like Vulture.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Like, that was Michael Keaton as Vulture. I was like, this is perfect. This is the coolest I've ever seen Vulture, right? Mysterio, same thing. And like, I like that they kept Vulture alive, so if they want to use him later, they can. But like, so many villains, they'll be so cool, and it's like, oh, they're dead now. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess that was fun while it lasted. I guess we're not going to see this person.
You can't get your villain team up or Suicide Squad type film with that if you keep killing all of these villains, unless they're all like multiversal versions of themselves, which is less exciting ultimately, because we haven't met those characters before.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And like, I loved Cassandra. I wish they would have kept her. We still have Paradox. Paradox did not die, so he's still around. So that's something. And I did like Paradox. He was a funny character. He was interesting. I liked his attitude and his like personality were great. Like, that was a highlight of the character for sure. But yeah, I mean, I really hope that they stop doing that. Like, of course, kill a villain every now and again, so there's appropriate stakes, so it's not like everybody's just going to get knocked out and
chucked into Arkham.
Yeah, like,
only to inevitably break out again.
Exactly. So like, I wish they would. I like that they are not afraid to kill villains, but they like, I feel like, just dial it down a little bit. Like, let us keep, like, Zemo, like Baron Zemo from Civil War, great villain. Showed up in Falcon Winter Soldier, was the best part of that show. Like, he was amazing, and the fact that he's just still around, he can show up at any time, and I love that, because he's such a compelling villain, But yeah, going back to what Laura said about the connectivity, that's another soapbox I wanted to get on. Is Marvel, when Deadpool made the remark of like, yeah, you're kind of coming in on a low point, I'm a Marvel fan through and through. I would love nothing more than every Marvel movie to be a hit. Unfortunately, that's not the reality we live in. And I will say, post Endgame, it's been kind of a struggle. There's been some good ones. There have been some really good movies and shows post Endgame, but I feel like Marvel was riding a high after Endgame, because they smashed records left and right? There was no one else doing what they were doing that well. So they were kind of in this like green light everything mode, just green light whatever, because we can't lose, we can't miss. And then you got all these different movies and shows that writers were writing, but didn't really have any stakes. Like, there was no connectivity to the Marvel universe as a whole. So like, when the thing that Marvel did so expertly in the first phase is introduce to the general population what it's like to read a comic book. Like these weren't just superhero movies. It was actually a Marvel comic movie where like Iron Man, he's the star of the movie, but it's really a movie about the world he's living in and how
Mm.
it's reacting to him and changing organically, right? Like you can see the repercussions of Captain America being a thing in the Iron Man movies, right? Like people have an expectation of what a hero is supposed to be. The fact that Thor is around, like Spider-Man even said, it's like, yeah, like we're literally learning about Thor in science class, and he used to be like a Norse god, so like you're seeing the world change in this organic way, which kind of lends itself to like the wonder of like opening up a comic book, flipping through and be like, oh my god, it's Daredevil, look at that. And if you want to know more about Daredevil, there's a whole run going on about Daredevil you can read if you want to. You don't have to, but the context for that character is there, and you have the world, like the Marvel world itself is a character. And in the first phase, and in the Infinity Saga in general, they nailed it because every movie that came out further developed that world in some way. But since Endgame, it's been very disconnected. Like there hasn't been really any real connection to any of the properties in a really profound way. Like there's been a few, like you have WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, but even that was very, very loose. Like it's almost like the people
Yeah.
who made Multiverse of Madness didn't really watch all of WandaVision. And that's kind of what happens when you're green lighting everything and all these writers are writing things simultaneously, and there's not as much communication as there was as like Iron Man to Captain America to Thor, right, to Avengers. Like, all those were super tight knit. Like it was so well oiled. And now you have, the person who made Ant-Man 3 not knowing that Kang was supposed to be the main villain for the phase. And it's like, that's something I feel could have just been in an email. You could have just emailed them like, hey, by
Right.
the
Yeah,
way,
well,
Yeah.
it's I know that's sort of behind the scenes controversy too with that actor, but so there was a stumbling point that wasn't, Marvel's fault. I also think it's the difference between focusing on character and focusing on plot.
Mm,
Something that the first, the Infinity Saga had in droves was both, because they
mhm,
took the time. To your point, Mark, they were able to take the time.
Yeah.
But now that they've established that world, I feel like with certain these series, you can kind of vibe. You can
mhm,
kind of just chill with some of these characters that you are familiar with. But the problem is when you're introducing characters that nobody has emotional stakes to, like the Eternals. Okay, what's
mhm,
their deal? They've been there forever. Great.
mhm.
What's the in there? And if it's not either well established, or if there's not also that world building to what you're saying that's actually leading to something, it can feel like a miss.
Yeah, like the perfect example. Like I love that you brought that up. The Eternals. A giant titan comes out of the earth and is just chilling in the ocean by the end of that movie, and no one references it. That was in 2021, and not one Marvel movie or show has referenced that at all. And I'm
Kind of like,
like,
we don't talk about that film.
yeah, and I'm like, there's a giant coming out of the water that's like frozen, made of alien material. I think they're finally gonna deliver on that in the Captain America 4. I think
Mm.
that's kind of
Brave
gonna
New
be kind
World.
of Brave New World. They're gonna talk about like what Tiamat or whatever their name was, the big Titan thing, is made of, and try to get those resources, yada yada yada. But yeah, like there is no like there's a lot of great shows. Like I love the Moon Knight. I thought it was great, but there was no stakes to Moon Knight. It happened completely separate, and it's like Doctor Strange should have showed up. Why you have a person who can use weird Egyptian magic, and Strange can just appear anywhere because he has a sling ring? It would have taken 1 5-minute scene at the end of the series to be like, "Hey, by the way, I'm Strange. What are you doing here? Come with me. We got to brief you." There you go, right?
Yeah.
But
Mm.
like because all these things were made concurrently, like the writers, and you had so many different writers, the writers didn't really line their stuff up. So you had some people doing things like, in Miss Marvel, Kamala's a mutant. And it's like, okay, cool, that's awesome, but why wasn't she included in all the other mutant stuff? Right? Like why wasn't that a story beat? Or even better, like I loved Iman Vellani as Kamala. She did a great job. Like she killed that role. and she's such a Marvel fan. You could just feel the enthusiasm from her in that role, because that's what Kamala's character is she's a super fan, basically becoming a hero. And the fact that well, not the whole show, but most of the show takes place in Jersey, and you can see New York, and there was no Spider-Man anything, like nothing. I'm like,
not even a mention.
not even a mention. Like they even
Yeah.
had the same cop that was in Spider-Man No Way Home when Peter was being interrogated. He was the main person going after Kamala, and I was like, you can't even, like, you couldn't even have him like swing by. You could have kept it. It didn't even have to be Tom Holland. You could have had Tom Holland record voice lines and just have a CG person in the suit swing by and help her and then dip. Right?
Or
like,
hell,
So,
you
yeah.
wouldn't even have to have him say anything. Just
No.
have him appear. And honestly, kind of bringing it back to Deadpool and Wolverine, I think one of the big connectivity misses of this movie is that Loki wasn't in it at all,
Yes.
given the amount of time that we spent at the TVA and the
Well-
amount of time that we spent talking about the sacred timeline.
Yeah, I am caught up on Loki, and I'll say Loki is not in the TVA at the end of Loki. He's out in the middle of space somewhere holding it all together. But
Of course.
I
God.
guess they could have shown him. Okay, I guess they could have. Otherwise, though, I think Wolverine and Logan, or Logan and Deadpool and Wolverine, is the perfect tonic to what you're talking about, Mark. The fact that there are so many little things in each of these ancillary Marvel things post Endgame that don't get called back or don't get pulled in. Deadpool is the opposite of that. Deadpool and Wolverine has, like you said, surgically in some cases thought of, fit in all of the disparate kind of characters here. Really nothing has been forgotten. I don't think, apart from what Laura just said, with Loki, it would have been great to see Tom Hiddleston. Instead, we got Chris Hemsworth. But, I think that really it would have been, otherwise nothing was overlooked. I think with Deadpool and Wolverine, nothing was overlooked in terms of things they should have brought in.
Yeah,
they didn't.
I agree. And I think there are a few things that I would have liked, but I don't think that it took away from the movie. Like with Cassandra, I would have liked a scene with Charles. I would have liked either old school Charles or James McAvoy Charles. Either one would have been fine, just to show them and have them interact in some way. It could have been when she was in Logan's head, you just see Charles. It wouldn't have been a stretch at all for Charles to be like, yeah, I put a psychic echo of myself in Logan's brain that is like helping Logan process things. And when Cassandra goes in, she sees him, or she sees a memory of Charles, and they kind of talk, and that's what kind of turns her from not being as evil as she was, like something, because like for her to have such a, like, I'm going to destroy you, I'm going to kill you as soon as you take this helmet off of me, to go from that to like, I'll let you live by, see you later, like,
yeah,
I'm like, like, the thing that made her so scary is like, yeah, she could destroy you immediately, like she did to poor Johnny. So
he had that coming.
He did have that. that was pretty great. But yeah, like, I feel like you're right, they did a good job of bringing in what they could. And again, let's keep this in mind, this movie was made during the writer's strike, so a lot of this is they did what they could, and for that they hit it out of the park. Right?
Yeah.
Like they reference so many things that, like, I mean, they reference the end of Loki too, right? Because the TVA that we saw is the TVA at the end of Loki 2. Because what was her name? B-15?
15?
I think B-15 was not in a like really high up position by the end of Loki 1.
Right. Well, they also made it clear, they made that clear by having Paradox state, oh yeah, we used to prune timelines, but we don't do that anymore. So we know that we're in a post Loki season 2 TVA for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say, and speaking more of like kind of the writer strike and kind of like why I feel like this is a good thing, is because of the writer strike, Marvel kind of had time to breathe. Like they had time to be like, hey, let's look at all these things that are coming out and let's reevaluate. And they put a lot of things back on the drawing board. Like they completely almost like rewrote Daredevil, because during the writer's strike, Feige kind of like read through what they had of Daredevil Born Again at that time, and he was like, we're putting this to rewrites. And every piece of news that has come out since then, the fans have been loving, where it's like Foggy's back, Karen's back, John Berthenol is back as Punisher, right? Like they are doing things that the fans will like this, versus before people were like at first Foggy and Karen weren't going to be in it, and people were like, what? Like,
how do you do a Daredevil? Well, was for
Yeah.
me, it's canonizing and honoring what came before, but you gotta pay the actors to show up, because otherwise they're siloed and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And see, exactly, like, and that is Marvel's main problem. As soon as an industry that has made their success on expertly weaving these stories together to give people a payoff that have watched everything but don't require it, like if that's always been their sweet spot, having this next saga where like nothing's really connected, yeah, people aren't going to really care as much, because the thing about the first saga was they were good movies on their own, but they were heightened by the fact that they're part of a larger narrative. And now that we don't have that, people are kind of like, okay, well, this is cool, I guess, but this doesn't hit the same as the first saga, which nothing will, because that was lightning in a bottle. Like that was so expertly done, and there was nothing that came before it really at that time. But I like this is a very good step in the right direction, because there's only so much they could have done with this movie because of when it was made, in terms of like, Marvel already had things coming down the pipeline, the writer's strike was happening, they were reevaluating things. Ryan Reynolds was very, very passionate to make this movie the best that he could. He's pretty much handling all the marketing himself. He's everywhere. he's
Well,
you know
didn't he also give up his salary?
Yes, so actually in Deadpool 1, actually, that's when he did that. It wasn't this movie. I was mistaken.
Okay.
I thought it was this movie. In Deadpool 1, he gave up his salary to make sure that the writers were like way more involved. And that's why it was such a hit. Like he literally was like, I want this to be a success because I genuinely want this character to be realized on screen. And
Wow.
like who else would do that? Like, and because he made that gamble, and he allegedly was the one that leaked the test footage for Deadpool. Like,
Oh, yeah.
we don't know for sure, but he's heavily implied. Like, he hasn't really said he didn't. So it's like, Ryan, you did it. You ain't fooling nobody. But the fact that he took such a risk to, petition, get the funds together, get a six-figure budget approved for test footage from Fox for a Deadpool movie, then turns around and leaks that footage to Comic-Con. People get super stoked and basically force Fox to make this movie. Then afterwards, he gives up his salary to the writers to make sure that they're involved in like every step of the movie. It's like, yeah, no wonder Deadpool 1 did so well. There's so much care.
That's an important thing to remember, is what you're saying is there's some of these moments where it's a labor of love. We tend to think of MCU or Marvel movie making to be this, and you have an infinite blank check here and go do the thing, and nobody ever has to worry about anything other than showing up. But with some of the best things that we've gotten have been that labor of love, and something that this movie in Deadpool and Wolverine made me realize, apart from everything Hugh Jackman is doing too, which is just next level, everyone that did these roles that's now reprising these roles and these cameos cared about that character. And it was nice to see them get to have another go round. Like it was really the people, I think, that got, the actors too, that got screwed out of not having more of a legacy in the Fox films, that got the most payoff here. Even seeing Tyler Mane back as Sabretooth or Ray Park back as Toad, I still think, some may be underused there, but still the fact that they got to come back, Elektra, they got mileage out of, like, even just Channing Tatum and Gambit, never got to see that in a movie, and here he is and in all the glory. So it's also like wish fulfillment of like, here's what things could have been with this studio that crashed and burned, got bought out by Disney, but here's what we can do about that. So it seems like Ryan Reynolds is just doing in this film what he was always doing is like, let's do right by the character, let's do right by some of these actors too, and kind of making that on a more like even global scale with this film. It just felt, that part of it felt just amazing.
Yes,
Do we feel
exactly.
like Deadpool and Wolverine saved the MCU? I mean, one of the big themes we've talked about is Deadpool is Marvel Jesus, right? He says that multiple times throughout the movie. Is this the reset that the MCU needed?
Are mutants now canonized into the MCU? I think now it's safe to say, because they're described as being, so there's no mutants from Earth 616, whatever the main Marvel, like the Iron Man.
There's Kamala.
Kamala, yeah,
Okay.
she's
Kamala,
a mutant.
That's pretty much it. Oh, and Namor. Namor's a mutant.
That's right. Yep.
But otherwise, Charles Xavier, his whole children, the X-Men, everything.
The closest we get is in the Marvels, the end of the Marvels. One of the characters goes through a portal and wakes up in a more traditional Fox X-Men universe, complete with the Beast and everything. Like, he's just there talking to them, and like they're in like a lab and whatever. So like they've been kind of weirdly, disjointedly pushing the idea of mutants, but there hasn't been any structure, right? There hasn't been any something happened and now there's a mutant gene. There hasn't been any of that.
Yeah, because I'm just remembering that in Deadpool and Wolverine, they take Deadpool out of his timeline where the first two movies were set and put him into the MCU.
Yeah.
And so everything with Fox is in a separate, like previously not crossed over multiverse until this film, where it's like, okay, there have been some overlaps.
The only overlap we had was in the Marvels, and that's pretty much it. Everything else has been them kind of floating the idea of mutants, like in Miss Marvel and in Namor, or in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Like, Namor was confirmed to be a mutant. They didn't, Charles didn't roll up and recruit him or anything, but they are using that word more liberally now, which is nice. But again, like, there hasn't been any structure to it. Like, when they introduced Thor, it was like, yeah, Asgard's a thing, here's all the people, this is the mythology, etc., etc., etc. Like, it'd be like if they were just like, yeah, Norse gods exist, ooh, and that's it, and you're like, okay, cool, whatever. But like, there's been more exposition on the Eternals than there has been on mutants in the MCU. And the Eternals, Eternals ain't going anywhere. Like, their story's pretty much done at this point.
Dead in the water.
Yeah. So like,
I just think there's so many social and political issues that any government, no matter who you are, can face. So I think mutants being in their own timeline makes a lot of sense, because those Fox films went really hard on how the government is handling just the mutant threat, let alone as Guardians and everybody else, Thanos. Like, there was no space in those universes to handle a Thanos thing.
I think,
didn't we get a Mojo-verse reference? I think it might have been, it was in Deadpool 2. They mentioned the Mojo situation. One of the recruits for X-Force was from like the Mojo-verse.
No, yes, Shatterstar or whatever his name was.
Yeah,
he was in 3. He was one of the guys at Wade's party.
No kidding.
Yeah, he was the guy with the hair that was eating the pizza.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, as well as Kyoko and Negasonic.
Man,
Teenage.
I love them so much.
Oh yeah, I loved seeing them.
I love how happy Wade is to talk to her all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you had to see that.
It's just like, you're great.
But yeah, I think that I don't know if he saved the MCU. I mean, literally he did in the story, obviously, but like,
right.
In terms of a more meta commentary, I think this is a step in the right direction. If this is direction that Marvel is going in post writer strike, if they keep this up, we'll be fine. But if we keep on getting these weirdly disjointed stories that don't have impact on the greater story, like I even had this happen to one of my friends. One of my friends at work wanted to get into Marvel Comics. I let them borrow like a big graphic novel that I had that was Avengers versus X-Men. They read it, they loved it, and they were like, I need more. And I gave them another one that was connected. So like, I got to see a new person experience that level of like, I like this character a lot. I want to see more of this character. Are there any more stories this character is in that tells me more about the character's motivation or their backstory or the context that they like, all that stuff. And I got to see them go through that. And it's like the reason why Marvel was successful in their first saga was they did that with everyone. People who would have picked up a comic in their lives got to experience that level of discovery of like, man, Infinity War was really fun. Like, I knew people that didn't watch any Marvel movies and just watched Infinity War and they were like, this is great. Then went back and watched like everything. And it's like, congratulations, you have like 20 movies that are all these characters.
Yeah.
Like that's how it is. You go into a comic book shop, you pick up a random comic, you start reading it, and you're like, man, Ghost Rider is pretty cool. Well, congratulations. There's like 40 years of Ghost Rider that you could watch or read.
There was no Ghost Rider in this.
There was not.
Was that Fox or was that Sony?
That was Fox. I would have loved Nicolas Cage.
Surprising omission. I forgot there was a sequel to that with Nick Cage in both films.
Yep. That was one miss. I would have loved a Ghost Rider. I would have loved that.
Okay, fair enough. I totally forgot about Good. The fact that I forgot that it ever was a thing until just now, it's like, okay.
But yeah, I feel like if they like, this was a good show of faith. I think we'll have to see when Brave New World comes out. It seems like they're getting more connected in that, right? Like, it kind of shows Sam, it shows the landscape of the world after all this crazy superhero stuff has happened. You see Ross as the president, like it seems like it's building something there, which I like. But like the secret sauce of Marvel has always been introducing these characters to situations in a growing and evolving and morphing world that gets developed every installment of the way. Like, that's what makes it like, when you watch a Marvel movie, it's just a Marvel movie featuring Iron Man, featuring Thor, featuring whoever. Like,
to your point, the world building is the
world is the thing you are seeing. It is a Marvel Universe movie. It's not Iron Man, and by the way, there's some other people. Like, look at how much the world has changed in the Marvel Universe from Iron Man 1 to like Endgame. It's completely different. And how they handle situations are different. Like, the Civil War was all about the government being like, hey, we can't just have heroes just doing stuff with no kind of like legal guideline.
One of my favorite things about Infinity War was the therapy sessions, where it's like all the people that lost loved ones that were gone that whole time, like, just after the snap.
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, you hit the nail on the head, because I completely forgot about that. Like, in Falcon Winter Soldier, it starts with Bucky in therapy, and I'm like, it is about time. Get this man in therapy.
Yeah.
That's honestly a lot of what we complain about often, is where's therapists in what's their role in any of these fantasy films. But again, showing the real world consequences is very smart. I think, to the question of did Deadpool save the MCU, I think that Deadpool reminded me, and maybe reminded the MCU, that it can be fun. That was the big reason I think Guardians of the Galaxy was so successful. When it was the first Marvel film that just had fun and poked fun at itself. It's like, oh, and then look at how that influenced the Thor series, because at that point you just had Thor 2, which was like really, really dark world. And it just feels so much like lighter and funnier because Star-Lord is there. Good films with good soundtracks even. I don't think a Marvel film had a good soundtrack before. It's great scores. But before Guardians of the Galaxy, and I think Deadpool Wolverine really strikes that same sort of humor in the MCU, for the MCU. And it's refreshing to have it come from, like, you don't need Star-Lord there to have fun with the MCU. And I think maybe that's, in a way, an instructive lesson as they continue making Marvel films. And Ant-Man, to another extent, is a different kind of, but like similar humor, where it's very fun to be there and witness it. So
for sure. I mean,
they
Spider-Man,
just got to keep doing that.
Yeah, Spider-Man, like Homecoming, right? That was another one where like Spider-Man Homecoming brought a lot of people into Marvel because they saw it and they were like, oh, this is a blast. Like, and the soundtrack in Spider-Man Homecoming was great. Right, like Blitzkrieg Bop, when he was swinging around, like, this is perfect. Like, this is the light kind of Spider-Man that people were looking for. Because as much as people complain that Tom Holland's Spider-Man wasn't the traditional Spider-Man, which I get, I understand that, but like, it was different enough, and he fit in that world. He fit perfectly in the MCU, and you get to see him mature and grow throughout his movies. So like Spider-Man is another great example. Like you see the world shift and change throughout his like the world of Homecoming is not the world of No Way Home, right? Like the landscape's completely different now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even in Far From Home, it's literally him dealing with half of the people in his class were blipped and half of them weren't. So you have people that are like 5 years older than everybody else in the same grade. And it's like, yeah, that is, and you get to see they're in the middle of a football, like a basketball game, and people just appear on the court. And it's like, yeah, we didn't really see that in any other Marvel franchise or any other Marvel movie, you
I
know?
mean, I feel like they did show consequences of the blip. I mean, we saw that happen in WandaVision, for
Mm-hmm.
example. We saw it happen in Hawkeye as well
Mm-hmm.
with Yelena. So I mean, they've sprinkled it through. I feel like
Yeah.
that, like the consequences of the snap and the blip, that's actually something I feel like they've done a better job
Yes.
of connecting than some of the other things,
Yeah,
like
I agree.
Eternals, which
Just
you
in
called
terms of
out.
movies, though, like that's pretty much
Yeah.
the only one. Like
Yeah, no, that's
in
true.
in the shows now, it's all over the place. In the shows, almost in every single Marvel show, there is some mention of the blip. There's some like,
Well, that's as it should be then.
yes.
That shows that overall the writing is interested in telling the human story of
Mm-hmm.
what realistically a society would look like where something like that happened.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like especially in Hawkeye, like with Yelena, when it's literally she goes to she's in the bathroom like washing her face or looking in the mirror, and she like kind of wakes up and she walks out of the bathroom and there's just a family living in that house now. And she's like, and she's a trained assassin, so she's about to kill him, and somebody stops her, so like, and same thing with WandaVision, when which one's the daughter, Maria or Monica? I always get them
Maria.
confused. Maria's the daughter. When
Yeah.
Maria's with Monica and she's like sitting in the hospital by her
Or no, wait. I think I might have that backwards.
is Monica the daughter?
Yeah.
I don't remember
think
this
so.
scene. I've seen WandaVision.
And it's earlier on when you're getting introduced to Monica, and like she's sitting with Maria in the bed, and like she has cancer
in the hospital,
and like
yeah.
you see the blip or the snap happen, and she gets snapped, and when she comes back in the hospital and her mom's gone, and like they're like, yeah, she passed away, she didn't make it, and like you just see people appearing in the hospital, and it's just pandemonium, and I'm like, it's heartbreaking, because you're seeing people be like, where's my son, where's my mom, where's my daughter, where's my brother, like all these things, and they're just so out of sorts, and I'm like, more of this that was the most, like, I loved WandaVision and I loved everything with Wanda. I think they did that show. That was a great show. But that was the first time I saw something where I'm like, oof, like this is the consequence of the things that have happened up to now. And that's kind of what we've been missing. I liked Moon Knight, right? I liked Miss Marvel. I liked all these shows, but like, they haven't really connected them. Like Guardians 3, loved Guardians 3, but Guardians are they kind of have their own thing, because they kind of exist in their own little like sweet spot, because it's in space, so you don't really got to mess with any of the things on Earth that much, and they occasionally pop up and stuff, and they were in Infinity War and Endgame, but like they get the privilege of not having to be as entrenched as something like Spider-Man, or Captain America, or even Doctor Strange. Even like Doctor Strange is a perfect example. Like there were so many weird things in Multiverse of Madness where it's like, where's Vision? Why wasn't Vision in that movie? He was one of the main people in WandaVision, right? Like there was just a lot of stuff like that.
He fucked off at the end of WandaVision, and
right?
he was like, "This bitch is crazy."
I mean, he did,
out.
but in every reality though, like in infinite realities, he was caught in every single one of them, because she looked. I'm like, you mean to tell me that she wouldn't have tried to find a reality with Vision and her kids?
Like, be like, good enough,
right? I'm like, that's weird. Like that's kind of. But
no, he noped out. He was like, she's nuts.
And that's another
she's
thing.
Nuts in every reality.
That's another thing. Where the hell has he been? Like he left at the end of WandaVision. We haven't seen higher hair of him the whole time.
Yeah,
so,
I don't know, but
is he still dead in most? multiverses?
Well, he's
killed by Thanos, because that would make sense.
Well, he is. So yes, he's a that was a nexus point. Vision dying, so that does happen in most universes. But the uh what's his name, the the white Vision, the all white new Vision,
Yeah, I forget what they
Yeah.
call him.
that
but
had the same
memories.
or whatever. That I'm like, where's he been? He literally just
Yeah.
flew away at the end, and would nobody notice a big robot guy who could go through walls when all this stuff is going on? Like,
So I
Yeah.
want to talk about, sort of as a way to sort of wrap thoughts on Deadpool and Wolverine also, if we're getting near that time. This prophecy that Ryan Reynolds made about Hugh Jackman, which is, now that you're back and Disney has you, they're going to make you do this till you're 90. 90!
Yeah.
There have been some actors that have successfully left the
Mhm.
MCU behind. We were just talking about Paul Bettany noping off like 10 films ago, after a very successful WandaVision and good appearances in the Avengers films.
Mhm.
But, is he gone forever? Is Tony Stark gone forever? I feel like Robert Downey Jr. has maybe turned down the opportunity to come back a few times when it would have been like a fun look here, here's this.
Mhm.
Good for him, I'm thinking, but are any actors safe from ever having to return in the MCU? Do we think that it's true that Hugh Jackman will be back in an MCU film?
I think for a lot of these actors, I think the last time we'll see a lot of them is probably Secret Wars, just because of the nature of that story. Like,
Remind me, is that coming? Is
Yeah.
it what's going on?
Secret Wars is the next Avengers movie, or the next Avengers
Whoever's
story, I
left
guess.
in the
Yeah, because it's going to be.
It's what these phases are building towards.
Yes.
It's like the next. Okay.
Exactly. And like in the comics, and of course it's not going to be exactly like the comics, because they put their own spin on it in the MCU a lot, but in the comics it is how they explain them consolidating all of the timelines and multiverse stuff into one universe. Like, post Secret Wars or pre Secret Wars, there was the regular Marvel universe, there was the Marvel Zombies universe, there was the Ultimate Universe, a bunch of different ones. And they did talk about incursions in Multiverse of Madness, where if two universes collide with each other, both or one of them will be destroyed. And in the regular Marvel comic universe, the 616 universe, the Ultimate Universe and the 616 universe combine. A bunch of the heroes fight. They try to figure out how to, survive, and it results with there just being one Marvel universe after that, and some people from the Ultimate Universe make it over, which is why Miles exists in the regular Marvel comics and not just the Ultimate Universe, because Miles originally was exclusively in the Ultimate Marvel Universe. So I feel like that's like their reset. Like, that's them being like, okay, we have actors that can't do these roles anymore. We have concepts we want to introduce, like mutants and stuff like that. So we can use this big universe reset event to change the status quo. So now we do have mutants that have always been here. We do have new people playing characters that we want to continue their story. Like, they could recast an Iron Man. They could recast Captain America if they want. They could recast whoever they want in Secret Wars and kind of use that as their reset button. So I could see them bringing back some of these characters for Secret Wars to like finally like give them their Logan swan song ending. Like, Captain America comes back and, maybe they talk to the new Captain America, or maybe Hugh Jackman comes back as Wolverine and like interacts with whoever the new Wolverine is going to be, hopefully Henry Cavill. And, they kind of, they kind of talk, and they kind of give them a send off, kind of. They kind of hand off the baton for.
That's interesting. Yeah, I do think a lot of what we were talking about with Logan and Wolverine and stuff is probably pending another recast of everybody. Yeah. Everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
Like, new Charles Xavier, new everything. Because at this point, even the first class actors, I feel bad. They've been through so much.
Mm-hmm.
They survived Dark Phoenix. Let them rest.
Yeah.
But like, even James McAvoy now is 8 films deep, into playing Charles Xavier, even if in cameos. Or Patrick Stewart was brought back for Multiverse of Madness as Charles Xavier, which is fun. That was fun.
Yeah.
He was in the chair.
Yep,
That
he
was really
was.
fun.
I know, that was cool.
But
And that's
still,
why I
like,
kind of wish that they had him in
Mm-hmm.
Deadpool and Wolverine,
yeah, that would have been cool.
even if just for like a very quick cameo. I'm not saying that, you know, that he or Tom Hiddleston needed to play big roles in this,
Yeah.
but it would have
Yeah.
been, I think, a
Well-
really nice addition to have quick glimpses of both of them,
Yes.
just to establish like this shit's all connected in
But-
case you didn't know.
Maybe it got to the point where that would have been kneecapping whoever's coming on next. Like maybe that's the thing where like Wolverine, like Hugh Jackman is the anchor point where they're like, this was the previous era and now they're going to introduce all these new people. I'm not sure, but to your point, Mark, if that is, you know, if in the comics that culminates kind of with Secret War, that makes sense as like the official passing of the torch and like, let's bring the mutants into the MCU big time.
And the reset button, because they need it. Like at this point, there's been so many actors that they've run their course. Like you can't keep on bringing back these people to play these characters. Like, so you kind of need, and honestly, even in comics, that's kind of the idea of when you have these big universe resetting events. Like every comic, like DC has one, Crisis on Infinite Earths or Infinite Crisis. There's always something where they like do a big explosion of the universe. Everything's reset. You can kind of change some of the characters' mythos, you know, and you change some things around. I think that's the perfect reset that they're pushing towards like, hey, there's been mutants all along. Hey, the Fantastic Four has been here all along, which that's a whole other thing we didn't even talk about, which is the new Fantastic Four movie with Pedro Pascal and them. Like that is like the...
Why are they even doing that again?
I mean, I will say, I do trust this one more than the others because the other ones were they were good. I like the first one. I like the cast of the first one, but like it was clear that Fox didn't really know what to do with those characters because those characters, just like a lot of characters in the MCU or in the Marvel universe, work best with being in a world that has other heroes. So if they're just the only people that have powers, you're like, okay, I guess you stretch. That's cool, I guess. But what, you know, what's the point? But if Reed's like the smartest person ever and you have like Tony calling him up to help him with something, cool. You know, like the kind of sets them up. Like you have Hulk, you know, rampaging and Thing shows up to stop them.
Did they still not do that? I didn't see the recent reboot of Fantastic Four with the kids. Did they not do that at all?
No,
like have it in the MCU?
They're in the no. This will be the first. The one with Pedro Pascal will be the first one in the MCU proper. Which again, that is what they were missing. Like that. Spider-Man kind of works because he's more ground level. But if you have the Fantastic Four stopping cosmic threats left and right, you can't really have them be in a world by themselves. It just doesn't work. Like the ground level people, Daredevil, Punisher, Spider-Man, even to a certain degree, it's okay. It's not as bad. And X-Men as a contained thing works because they have such a rich catalog, right? And a rich world that could kind of stand by itself. But like Fantastic Four, like people call them all the time. Spider-Man hangs out with the Fantastic Four all the time. They're in New York. They're in the same city, you know? So like...
Right, a lot of things happening in New York.
Yeah, so like it's kind of weird to have them by themselves. So like bringing them into the MCU proper, I think is a good move. I think that is what they were missing because even Spider-Man, like people kind of like at first didn't like Tom Holland as Spider-Man because they thought he was like kind of... He wasn't confident enough, which that's Peter Parker. But if you live in a world...
That is Peter Parker.
Yeah, I know. But if you live in a world where you have powers, right? But you're not the strongest or you're not the smartest. Like Spider-Man's strong. He's not Thor strong, right? And he's smart, but he's not Iron Man smart. That instantly grounds him because it's like, okay, I'm just not hot shit and I can't do whatever I want. Honestly, with Tobey Maguire, I love him, but the only reason he kind of wasn't an asshole is just because he was a nice guy. Like, because there was nobody in the world that was stronger than him at that point. Like, you had Green Goblin, but that was it. Like, Andrew Garfield being kind of a smartass fit because there was no one else who had powers in his world. It was just him. And so if you give a teenager that kind of power and there's no grounding mechanism by being like, yeah, you're really smart, but Tony Stark doesn't have any powers and he's smarter than you and he can wreck you at any point. Yeah, you're really strong, but if you ever just went on a rampage, Thor would just show up and, backhand it and you're done, right? So like it instantly kind of gives him parameters. But when you put these characters that were made to be in a joint universe by themselves, it's a little bit more challenging to make them believable,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
a lot of
I think
sense.
that's something to kind of bring us to a wrapping point here, because honestly we could go on and on and on for hours, but I want to
really
make sure
enjoyed this.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I want to make sure that we're ending on Deadpool and Wolverine. Obviously this all exists in the greater MCU and the continuity, and I think that this movie is like part one of the reset button, if
Mm-hmm.
you will. Mark, you were talking about the reset button with Secret Wars. I
Mm-hmm.
think that this movie is like the initial push of
Mm-hmm.
the reset button,
It's
and hopefully Secret Wars will be the release so that it all
it's
takes
taking
effect.
it's taking the plastic cover off the button, and now your fingers just
Yeah.
over it. Like that's
Love that.
what
Love
that
that.
is.
But it I think it maybe generates more goodwill because you
Mhm.
can tell that Ryan Reynolds put his freaking heart into this,
Mhm.
and because of how well thought out all the Fox cameos were and all the characters that got paid off, it will generate a lot of like goodwill,
Mhm.
like I think to that, and confidence that the MCU can be getting to a point where it's back to everything that we loved about the old ones.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Marvel's back, baby.
Yeah, this is a great step in the right direction. Like this
Yeah.
this
So
is
Ryan Reynolds is MCU Jesus.
honestly
I think.
Yeah,
if I were
kinda.
Feige, I'd be like, all right, you're in a writer role now. You're one of the
Yeah.
main producers now. Like,
And
why
in
not?
charge of the marketing
Oh yeah,
too, because
the
the marketing
marketing
for this movie was fantastic.
chef's kiss. It was so
Yeah.
good.
Did you guys get the preamble where they tell you to get off your phone?
Yeah.
With Hugh Jackman and yeah.
Yeah.
Like, wait, what's happening?
Yeah.
The movie start?
Yeah, it's like and again, like you said, we could talk about this all day, but like yeah, it was just all in all fun movie. I had a blast. A lot of things for the fans, a lot of things if you're not a fan too. Like they don't leave you out to dry, which is great.
Ultimately, too, an angrier version of Wolverine
Mhm.
than we've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And
Which-
but we understand why.
Yeah, and honestly, that's how Wolverine is. Like the Wolverine we've seen for years isn't really how Wolverine is in the comics. Like when we saw Short King Wolverine, that
That
is
was
Wolverine.
so great.
Like that is how
Yeah.
tall Wolverine is in the actual like.
I remember
Marvel.
the animated series. He's
Yeah.
the shortest man
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, in X-Men 97, which if you haven't watched it, everybody watch it. It's amazing.
I know.
It's amazing.
Oh God,
Oh,
we could have a whole
we could-
other episode talking about
Let's do
that.
it.
Honestly,
I'm in.
Yeah.
I gotcha, I'm in. But
you son of a bitch, I'm in.
but yeah, like that is kind of Wolverine. Hugh Jackman kind of morphed him into a new character that is almost separate from his traditional comic run. Of course, it was inspired by it, and Hugh Jackman did his homework. But like,
He's more palatable.
yeah, he made him a little bit more easy on the masses. But now it's like we're gonna get angry Wolverine. Like angry Wolverine, if you could roll up to him in a bar, he's going to stab you, which he did multiple times. Like that was great. That was great.
Yeah. Well, y'all, thank you so much for joining me to have this recap and reaction review, but also kind of a broader conversation about where Deadpool and Wolverine fits into the MCU and what consequences it's going to have for the continuity of the MCU. I'm really excited to see what comes next. For all of y'all watching at home, please let us know in the comments what your favorite parts of Deadpool and Wolverine were. We'd also love to hear your theories about what's next for the MCU and how much we're going to see Deadpool breaking the fourth wall in it. Please also don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really, really helps us out because we are a new podcast, and you can also listen to What the Hype wherever you listen to podcasts. Eric and Mark, thank you so much for joining me again today, and we will see y'all next time we have a water cooler installment. Take care, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.